Welcome back to UAP Rant, episode 8. Last 7 episodes we've been building on some research that we've undertaken in the field around anomalous orbs and rods and what we think is an interdimensional anomaly in the outback of Western Australia. So we've been researching, collating, analysing and writing up a lot of data on this from high resolution videography and photometry, and discussing how all that is connected through history with what we think is field repulsion science. And I did mention some key players in that sort of post-World War II up into the 90s. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that today and connect it back to the research that I'm doing and the book and papers that I've written that are coming out next year on the results of our research and the way we're going to move forward with that program. So today, if you haven't already, please get into the previous podcast to put today's one in context. But I want to pick up on a person involved in that whole area of field repulsion science in previous decades, and that's Dr. Ning Li and her associate Douglas Torr. Now, there's a bit of mystery around Dr. Ning Li's work. I think it was taken offline where she ended up working in national security circles, and because her research at a university in the US was to do with what she called a gravity disk, like a rotating disk that she developed. I think it was using a phased array system. I have to look up the specifics of the spin. But she generated from it a gravity-like effect. Now, she did point out in her musings that doesn't mean that it was gravity or anti-gravity, but it had a gravity-like effect. And I think she's referring to field repulsion technology or field repulsion science, because what it was able to do was push away a mass above the disk, away from it, and she said that she could guide and determine the amount of repulsion generated by this disk due to how it was arranged and spun and what its composition was made of. Now, the details are quite scarce on the findings of her work and their application, because it seems that the results of her work were taken offline or tied up, or somehow her career was shunted into the private sector. So it becomes quite hard to document or track down where her work went after that, because it disappeared from public view. But what we can do is relate back this whole idea of gravity disk repulsion to the science that we're looking at in the field with our raw rods and orbs that I talked about previously, and this double capacitor dielectric model for capacitor induction in and how that links to a chemoelectrical model in terms of the ability or the kinetics or the morphology of these objects to overcome inertia and I suppose repulse what's around them so they can orientate themselves in physical space. And we looked at how electric fields in 4 dimensions were connected to 3D magnetic vector fields, and that whole idea of repulsion around this, and the fact that they had counter-rotating spindles around the rods that enabled the build-up of this charge and self-generating power. So that reminded me of Dr. Ning Li's work with the spinning gravity disk and achieving the same result. And the only key difference is that with Dr. Ning Li, the force was external to the object and repulsing the object, whereas in the rods and the counter-rotating spindles or bisected rings, the repulsed object is actually the object itself inside this outer layer or spindle that's generating this repulsive field. So I think whether the mass is outside or inside the repulsive field, it's the same principle. It's repulsion field science. The interesting thing that we want to look at in further detail is how that's connected back to other characters before Dr. Ning Li. So that's Otis Carr, and I'll go back to Victor Schauberger, and then right back to Maxwell's original equations for four space geometric potentials. So we're heading along those lines and working backwards now with these characters, because I've spent 5 years of research in this whole area of field repulsion science, because it overlaps so many things. It overlaps the life sciences, biology, earth science, chemistry, physics, mathematics. There's this whole branch of science that's just missing in action alongside Newtonian physics, general relativity, and quantum mechanics. And I've written a book on it, because everything that I observed in the field, and I go back to observation. I put aside all my biases, all the other work in other fields of science, and go, let's start with observation and application of the scientific method, do the research, analyse the data, put it in the context of other work. And that's what's happened. And we've come up with some very interesting results that point to a whole branch of science that's just not there, and it should be. And I have a number of reasons as to why that's been the case, and that's in my book coming out next year. So I'll leave it at that for now. That's today's session for UAP Rant, and we'll talk again soon.